The small crystalline medical pod descended through Earth's atmosphere, its pilot nervously checking the landing coordinates for the 100th time. Inside, Amy's crystalline form shimmered with a mix of excitement and anxiety. She was making history as the first Brightfolk medical student to participate in Earth's medical exchange program, though right now she wished she had chosen a less adventurous assignment. The pod touched down in a clearing near a simple white building marked with a red cross. Amy had studied Earth's medical symbols extensively, but seeing one in person made her inner light pulse faster. As she stepped out of her pod, her crystalline feet touching Earth's soil for the first time, she marveled at how different everything felt from the sterile environment of her homeworld. A tall human male walked out of the building, wearing what her studies identified as standard Earth medical attire: white coat, stethoscope, and a friendly smile. "Welcome to Earth's Western Mountain Emergency Clinic. I'm Dr. Tom," he said, extending his hand. Amy carefully extended her own crystalline appendage, remembering the briefing about human greeting customs. "I am medical student Amy," she replied, using her chosen Earth name. Her true name was a complex pattern of light frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't reproduce. "Thank you for accepting me into your facility." Her translator device worked perfectly, converting her light patterns into human speech. Tom led her inside, and Amy's sensors immediately began cataloging the primitive equipment around her. Where were the molecular reconstructors, the neural pattern stabilizers, the quantum healing chambers? Instead, she saw basic tools: needles, thread, bandages, and various metal instruments that looked alarmingly manual in nature. "I know it's probably different from what you're used to," Tom said, noting her concerned shimmer. "But sometimes the old ways work best, especially out here, where we can't always count on having power for the fancier equipment." Amy's light patterns flickered in what her species considered a polite expression of doubt. "On my world, we haven't used manual medical tools in over 3 centuries. Our bodies are too delicate for such crude methods." She immediately worried she had offended him, but Tom just laughed. "That's exactly why this exchange program is so important," he explained, showing her around the clinic's small emergency room. "Humans and Brightfolk are practically opposites when it comes to medical needs. Your bodies are incredibly refined, capable of complex bioluminescent processes we're just beginning to understand. But they're also fragile. Meanwhile, humans are like the tanks of the galaxy: resilient, self-repairing, and surprisingly hard to break permanently." Amy noticed the X-ray images on the wall, showing various human bone structures. "Is it true that humans can continue functioning with multiple bone fractures?" she asked, her form shimmering with curiosity. "Oh, definitely. I once had a patient walk in with 3 broken ribs and a fractured arm. He wanted to know if we could patch him up quick because he had a fishing trip planned." Tom shook his head, smiling at the memory. Amy's light dimmed slightly in shock. On her world, even a minor crack in their crystalline structure required immediate specialized care and weeks of recovery. The idea of continuing normal activities with multiple fractures was incomprehensible. As Tom showed her the supply room, a loud rumble of thunder made Amy's entire form vibrate in surprise. "Don't worry," Tom reassured her. "Just a mountain storm coming in. Though we might lose power for a bit. Happens pretty often out here." "Lose power?" Amy's voice carried a note of alarm. "But how will we operate the medical equipment?" "Most of our basic equipment runs on backup generators, and for everything else." Tom held up his hands, wiggling his fingers. "We do it the old-fashioned way. Speaking of which, how about we start with basic human anatomy? You'll need to understand why we can handle treatments that would shatter your people." As they began reviewing human medical texts, Amy tried to suppress her horror at the primitive methods described. Yet she couldn't deny her fascination with these resilient beings who could apparently heal from injuries that would be fatal to her kind. She had chosen this remote clinic specifically to study human medical practices, and now she was beginning to understand just how different their approaches to medicine truly were. Little did she know, She was about to get a much closer look at human resilience than she had ever bargained for. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon finally hit with full force. Rain hammered against the clinic's windows while wind howled through the mountain passes. Amy's crystalline form reflected the lightning flashes, sending sparkles of light dancing across the clinic walls. 3 hours into the storm, the power flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The backup generators hummed to life, but they only powered the essential emergency lights and basic equipment. Amy felt her anxiety rising as she watched Tom check the remaining power supplies. "Don't worry," Tom said, noticing her dimming glow. "We're used to this up here. The generators will keep the critical systems running." He was checking their supplies when the emergency radio crackled to life. "Emergency dispatch to Mountain Clinic." A voice fought through the static. "We have a ranger down. Multiple injuries from a rescue attempt. ETA 10 minutes. Tom grabbed the radio. "Received. What's the status?" "Ranger Jack. He was securing hikers trapped by a mudslide. Ground gave way. Suspected fractures, possibly multiple. Can't get the medical helicopter up in this storm." Amy's form pulsed with concern. "Multiple fractures. Without power for the bone regenerator. Should we call for emergency evacuation?" Tom was already preparing the examination room. "No time. Roads are probably blocked by now, and the storm makes air rescue impossible. We'll handle this the old way." He looked at Amy. "Ready for your first real human emergency." Before Amy could protest, headlights cut through the rain. 2 other rangers carried in their injured colleague, who was somehow still conscious. Ranger Jack was covered in mud, his uniform torn, but he was smiling. "Hey, Doc," Jack said through gritted teeth. "Bit of a rough day." His right arm hung at an odd angle, and his breathing suggested rib injuries. Amy's sensors went into overdrive, automatically cataloging the injuries. 3 fractured ribs, a broken arm, and what appeared to be a dislocated shoulder. On her world, such injuries would require immediate stasis and crystal regeneration therapy. The patient would be unconscious from shock alone. But this human was not only conscious, he was making jokes. "Got the hikers out, though," Jack added as they helped him onto the examination table. "Family of 4, all safe." Tom quickly examined Jack, while Amy hovered nearby, her crystalline form shifting between fascination and horror. The ranger's pain levels should have been unbearable, yet his vital signs were surprisingly stable. "Good news," Tom said after checking the portable X-ray results. "Clean breaks." "Bad news. With the power out, we're doing this manually." "Just like old times, Doc." Jack chuckled, then winced. Amy's translator almost glitched trying to process that response. "You've done this before." "Third time's the charm," Jack replied. "Though last time we at least had power for the good drugs." He looked at Tom. "No fancy pain meds today, I'm guessing." Tom shook his head. "Local anesthetic only. Need you aware for this." He turned to Amy. "Want to assist? It's a good chance to learn about human emergency care." Amy's light flickered uncertainly. The idea of manually manipulating broken bones went against everything she had learned. It seemed barbaric, dangerous, and absolutely fascinating. I will observe," she managed to say. Thunder crashed outside as Tom prepared his equipment. Simple metal tools that looked medieval to Amy's advanced medical training. The storm had intensified, matching the growing tension in the room. Through it all, Jack remained remarkably calm, even trying to explain to Amy how human bones could knit back together naturally. "The best part," he said, as Tom cleaned the area around the breaks, "is that they end up stronger at the break points. Pretty cool, right?" Amy's glow flickered in disbelief. The human was about to have his bones manually reset, with minimal pain management, during a power outage, and he was giving her a biology lesson. As Tom positioned himself to begin the procedure, Amy steeled herself to watch. She had come to Earth to learn about human medical practices. She just hadn't expected such an intense first lesson. The local anesthetic had barely taken effect when Tom started explaining the procedure to Amy. Her crystalline form trembled slightly as she recorded every detail, both for her official report and her own morbid curiosity. The storm continued to rage outside, making the clinic feel like a tiny island of light in a sea of darkness. "First, we'll reset the arm," Tom said, his voice calm and steady. "Then we'll deal with the shoulder. The ribs will heal on their own as long as we wrap them properly." He positioned his hands on Jack's broken arm, and Amy's glow dimmed in anticipation of the screaming that would surely follow. "Hey, Amy," Jack called out, apparently noticing her distress. "Want to hear about the time I had to climb down a cliff with a broken leg to rescue a lost dog?" His voice was completely casual, as if he were telling a story at dinner rather than preparing for what Amy considered primitive torture. Tom nodded approvingly at Jack's distraction technique. "Ready?" he asked, gripping the arm firmly. "Go for it, Doc," Jack replied, and then continued his story. "So there I was, halfway down this cliff face." His words were cut off by a sharp crack that made Amy's entire crystalline structure vibrate in sympathy. But remarkably, Jack only grunted and took a deep breath before continuing. "As I was saying, this puppy was stuck on a ledge." Amy's sensors were going haywire. They detected the expected pain signals from Jack's nervous system, but his vital signs remained surprisingly stable. Even more shocking was his continued consciousness and apparent ability to carry on a conversation. "The puppy was a golden retriever," Jack said, pausing only slightly as Tom manipulated the broken bone. "Sweetest thing. Named Lucky, if you can believe it." Another crack echoed through the room, followed by Jack's short laugh. "Though I guess I was the unlucky one that day." Tom worked methodically, his experienced hands guiding the bones back into proper alignment. "Amy," he called out, "come closer. You need to see how the bones align. This is important for your understanding of human emergency care." Amy moved closer, her light casting a soft glow over the procedure. Her medical training told her this was impossible. No species could remain this calm during such an invasive procedure. Yet here was living proof that humans were somehow different. "See how the bone fragments match up." Tom pointed to the area he was working on. "Human bones are designed to heal this way. The break creates a sort of pattern, like a puzzle piece. Like a puzzle piece that really, really hurts," Jack added helpfully, causing Tom to shake his head in amused exasperation. The shoulder was next. Tom explained how it had to be rotated back into its socket, a process that made Amy's own crystalline joints ache in sympathy. "This part's always fun," Jack commented, and Amy couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic. "Deep breath," Tom warned, and then there was a loud pop as the shoulder joint realigned. Jack let out a long whistle, but kept talking about his various rescue adventures, as if nothing had happened. Amy found herself caught between horror and amazement. Her people needed weeks of gentle crystal realignment for even minor cracks. Yet here was this human casually chatting while having major bones reset without proper pain management or modern equipment. "The real trick," Jack was saying, apparently determined to turn this into an impromptu lecture, "is knowing how to fall right. When I felt the ground giving way today, I made sure to." He demonstrated a rolling motion with his good arm, completely focused on teaching despite his injuries. Tom finished securing the arm in a splint and began wrapping Jack's ribs. The whole procedure had taken less than 30 minutes, and the patient was not only conscious, but apparently giving safety lessons. Amy's medical training had never prepared her for anything like this. "And that," Tom said, securing the last bandage, "is how we handle emergency bone setting in the field." He turned to Amy, who was still trying to process what she had witnessed. "Any questions?" Amy had thousands of questions, but her translator seemed unable to form them into words. Her species prided themselves on their advanced medical knowledge. Yet she had just witnessed something that challenged everything she thought she knew about biological resilience. As Tom worked on securing the final bandages, Jack seemed determined to turn his treatment room into a storytelling session. The storm outside had settled into a steady drumbeat of rain, providing a bizarre background soundtrack to his tales of past injuries and rescues. "You think this is bad?" Jack gestured at his freshly splinted arm. "Let me tell you about the time I got caught in an avalanche. Now that was a rough day." He shifted slightly on the examination table, getting more comfortable as if he were sitting in a coffee shop rather than recovering from multiple fractures. Amy's crystalline form flickered uncertainly. Her sensors were still trying to process how this human could be so casual about severe physical trauma. On her world, medical students spent years learning how to prevent their patients from experiencing even the slightest discomfort. "So there I was," Jack continued, buried under about 6 feet of snow, had a broken leg and 3 cracked ribs. Could barely move. He paused to let Tom adjust his bandages. "You know what the worst part was? I had to reset that leg myself before I could dig out." The light patterns across Amy's surface became erratic. "You reset your own broken bone." Her translator struggled to convey the mix of horror and disbelief in her voice. "Sure did. Learned that trick in survival training. Sometimes you've got to fix yourself up before you can help others." Jack demonstrated the motion with his good hand. "Line it up, quick pull, and pop it back in place. Hurts like hell, but it works." Tom nodded as he checked Jack's vital signs. "It's not recommended, but Jack's right. In extreme situations, humans can perform emergency medical procedures on themselves. Our bodies are remarkably adaptable." Amy's glow dimmed significantly. She had read reports about human resilience, but hearing about self-administered emergency medicine was entirely different. Her own species required specialized crystal harmonics just to dull the pain of a minor crack. "Oh, and there was this other time," Jack said, apparently warming to his role as storyteller, "when I got stuck in a cave with a dislocated shoulder. Had to pop that back in using the cave wall. That was interesting." The monitoring equipment began picking up unusual patterns in Amy's crystalline structure, but she couldn't look away. It was like watching a fascinating and terrifying documentary about an alien species, which she realized was exactly what she was doing. "The trick with shoulders," Jack demonstrated with his good arm again, "is getting the angle right. You have to." He made a rotating motion that produced a slight grinding sound from his injured arm. Amy's form shimmered in distress. Tom quickly stepped in. "Maybe we should save the shoulder relocation lessons for another day, Jack. I think we're overwhelming our guest." But Jack was on a roll. "Did I ever tell you about the time I had to help another ranger reset his hip after a fall?" Now that was a loud pop. Sounded like a branch breaking, but bigger. Kind of like. He moved slightly, causing another grinding sound. Amy's usually clear crystalline surface began to show signs of stress fractures, tiny lines appearing and disappearing as her form tried to process what she was hearing. Her species' natural empathy, combined with their physical fragility, made these stories almost unbearable. And then there was this incident with a mountain bike and a very angry bear, Jack continued cheerfully. Ended up with a spiral fracture that had to be. He made a twisting motion with his hand that produced yet another unsettling sound from his injuries. The monitoring equipment started beeping as Amy's vital signs became erratic. Her normally bright glow was fluctuating between brilliant flashes and dim pulses. The crystalline patterns that made up her form were struggling to maintain their usual orderly arrangement. "Hey, you okay there?" Jack asked, finally noticing her distress. "I didn't even get to the really interesting part about how we had to." Tom raised a hand to stop him. "Jack, maybe we should pause the stories for now. I think our colleague needs a moment to." But it was too late. The combination of Jack's casual attitude towards severe injuries, the graphic descriptions of self-administered emergency medicine, and the continued sounds of shifting broken bones proved too much for Amy's crystalline nervous system to handle. The final straw came when Jack tried to demonstrate how he had once improvised a splint using tree branches. As he moved, his newly reset bones made a slight grinding sound, and Amy's crystalline form began to react dramatically. Her usually smooth surface developed a rippling pattern, like waves moving across a pond. And then I had to tighten the makeshift splint by. Jack's words were cut short by a strange, high-pitched sound coming from Amy's direction. Her translator had started producing random frequencies as her consciousness began to fade. "Amy?" Tom stepped toward her, noticing how her usually bright glow was flickering like a dying light bulb. "Maybe you should sit down." But Amy couldn't process his words anymore. Her normally clear crystalline structure was becoming cloudy, and the patterns of light that made up her consciousness were swirling in chaotic ways. The monitoring equipment was now letting out a constant stream of worried beats. "Is she supposed to look like that?" Jack asked, genuine concern replacing his storytelling enthusiasm. "She's gone all foggy, like a window in winter." Tom reached for her just as Amy's form began to sway. The light patterns within her crystalline body were now moving in ways that defied their normal orderly arrangement. It was like watching a kaleidoscope having a panic attack. "I think she's going to," Tom started to say, but before he could finish, Amy's entire form dimmed dramatically. The last thing her sensors recorded was Jack saying something about the time he had to crawl 2 miles with a broken ankle. Then, with a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, Amy's consciousness crystals shut down completely. Her form, now almost transparent, began to tip sideways. Tom caught her before she could hit the ground, carefully laying her crystalline form on the emergency bed next to Jack's. Her usually bright surface had become almost completely transparent, with only the faintest glimmer of light pulsing deep within. "Well," Jack said, looking down at the unconscious alien medical student, "that's a first. Never had someone pass out from watching me get patched up before." He scratched his head with his good hand. "Should we try to reset her or something?" Tom quickly checked Amy's vital signs using the specialized equipment they'd received for the exchange program. "No touching," he warned Jack. "Bright folk are incredibly fragile when they're unconscious. Their whole crystalline structure becomes unstable." The storm outside had finally begun to calm, as if nature itself was trying to be quieter for their unconscious guest. The backup generators hummed steadily in the background as Tom monitored Amy's condition. "Their medical manual said this might happen," Tom explained, adjusting some settings on the monitoring equipment. "Bright folk can experience consciousness disruption if they're exposed to too many stress signals at once. Their empathic abilities make them particularly sensitive to others' pain or trauma." Jack looked genuinely guilty. Maybe I shouldn't have told her about that time I had to pop my own kneecap back into place using a rock and a stick. "Probably not," Tom agreed, watching as tiny sparks of light slowly began to return to Amy's form. Their species evolved in an environment with almost no physical dangers. They developed incredible mental and technological capabilities, but their bodies remained extremely delicate. "Kind of the opposite of humans, huh?" Jack mused, absently rubbing his newly splinted arm. "We evolved getting chased by predators and falling out of trees. No wonder we ended up so durable." Tom nodded, noticing that Amy's surface was starting to regain some of its clarity. "She's stabilizing. Should wake up soon." He checked the monitors again. "Though I think we should probably avoid any more stories about self-administered emergency medicine for a while." "Fair enough," Jack agreed. "Though I didn't even get to tell her about the time I had to." Tom raised a warning hand. "Jack." Right. Saving that one for later." Jack settled back on his bed, watching as Amy's form slowly began to regain its usual luminescence. "You know, when she wakes up, someone should probably explain to her about human pain tolerances. Might help avoid future fainting spells." Tom just shook his head, wondering how he was going to explain this incident in his exchange program report. "One thing at a time, Jack. One thing at a time." Amy's consciousness returned slowly, like a computer rebooting after a crash. The first thing she noticed was that her translator was making odd chirping sounds as it recalibrated. The second thing she noticed was that Jack was sitting up in his bed, casually drinking water through a straw while checking his phone with his good hand. "Welcome back," Tom said softly, monitoring her recovery readings. "How are you feeling?" Amy's form shimmered weakly as her systems came back online. "I experienced a consciousness disruption." Her translator still had a slight static quality to it, making her voice sound fuzzy. "That's a fancy way of saying you fainted," Jack commented cheerfully. "Don't worry about it. Happens to plenty of humans their first time in emergency medicine too." Amy's surface rippled with embarrassment, creating rainbow-like patterns across her crystalline form. I am meant to be studying human medical practices, not becoming a patient myself." She tried to sit up, but her structure was still slightly unstable. "Easy there," Tom cautioned. "Your crystalline matrix needs time to restabilize. Just rest for a moment." He checked her readings again. "Though I have to say this has been educational for all of us. We've never had a chance to observe bright folk emergency recovery before." Jack nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, and I'd never had anyone actually pass out from hearing about injuries before. Usually people just tell me to stop talking." He grinned, then winced slightly as he shifted his splinted arm. Amy's glow brightened slightly as her systems continued to recover. "I don't understand," she said, her translator finally back to normal. "How can you be so casual about such severe physical trauma? My species would require months of recovery and therapy for injuries like yours." "That's the neat thing about humans," Jack replied, taking another sip of his water. "We're basically built to break and repair ourselves. These bones," he gestured to his splinted arm, "they'll be stronger than before once they heal." Tom pulled up some images on a tablet, showing Amy the human healing process. "See, when human bones break, they don't just grow back together. They create extra reinforcement at the break point. It's like the body learns from the injury and prepares for future stress." Amy's scientific curiosity began to override her previous distress. "Fascinating. So humans are not just tolerant of damage, but actually improve from it." Her form was now glowing steadily as she processed this new information. "Exactly," Tom confirmed. "It's not just bones either. Human muscle fibers get stronger after being damaged during exercise. Our skin grows tougher in response to friction. Even our immune system gets better at fighting diseases after exposure to them. Like a living adaptive system," Amy marveled, her previous horror now transforming into professional interest. "My people focused so much on preventing any kind of damage that we never developed such resilience." Jack finished his water and set the cup aside. "Different evolutionary paths, I guess. You folks got the brains and the fancy crystal technology. We got the ability to walk off a broken leg in an emergency." "Speaking of which," Tom interjected, "how are your pain levels, Jack?" About a 4 out of 10, Jack shrugged. "Had worse paper cuts." He caught Amy's startled shimmer and quickly added, "That's a joke." "Kind of." Amy's form stabilized completely as she absorbed this new perspective on human biology. "I believe I understand now why the medical exchange program is so important. Our species have such different approaches to healing and injury." "And different strengths," Tom added. "Your people's medical technology is incredible, and our resilience is remarkable in its own way. Together, we can learn from both approaches." Just then, the main power flickered back on, bringing the clinic's full systems online. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind not just repaired bones and recovered consciousness, but also a deeper understanding between two very different species. "So," Jack said brightly, ready to hear about the time I had to set my own dislocated finger during a mountain climbing expedition. "Jack," Tom mourned, but to everyone's surprise, Amy's form glowed with what could only be described as curious amusement. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "but this time, I should probably be sitting down first." 2 weeks after the incident, Amy sat in her crystalline pod, finalizing her report to the Galactic Medical Council. Her form glowed steadily as she reviewed the footage from that stormy night, no longer feeling faint at the sight of Jack's treatment. Instead, she felt a strange mix of admiration and scientific fascination. The report on her screen glowed with soft blue light as she added her final observations. Human medical practices, while appearing primitive by Brightfolk standards, demonstrate a remarkable understanding of their species' natural healing abilities. Their emergency medical procedures, though shocking to non-human observers, are perfectly adapted to their incredibly resilient biology. Through her pod's window, she could see Jack walking into the clinic for his follow-up appointment. His splint was already off, and he was moving the formerly broken arm with only slight stiffness. By Brightfolk standards, this recovery speed was nothing short of miraculous. Amy continued typing. Special note must be made of human pain tolerance and healing capabilities. What our species would consider catastrophic damage, humans often treat as temporary inconveniences. Their bones not only repair themselves, but actually become stronger at the point of injury. This adaptation suggests an evolutionary history that favored resilience over protection. She paused to watch Jack demonstrating his arm's range of motion to a group of amazed Brightfolk medical students who had arrived after hearing about the incident. One of them was already showing signs of distress, their crystalline form shimmering uncertainly. Recommendation: all non-human medical observers should be warned about human emergency procedures before witnessing them. The casual attitude humans display towards severe physical trauma can be extremely disturbing to species with more fragile physiologies. Proper preparation and stabilization protocols should be in place for alien observers. Tom walked past her pod, waving cheerfully. He was carrying a new manual he had written, Cross-Species Medical Care, a guide to human and Brightfolk emergency procedures. Amy's incident had inspired him to create proper guidelines for future exchange students. Furthermore, Amy typed, her glow brightening with professional pride. I believe this experience highlights the importance of combining our different medical approaches. While Brightfolk technology can assist human healing, human natural resilience offers valuable insights for improving our own emergency care protocols. Inside the clinic, she could see Jack enthusiastically explaining something to the new students. One of them was already sitting down, their glow flickering worryingly. Annie quickly added another note. Strong recommendation. Ranger Jack should be required to warn alien medical students before sharing his interesting injury stories. She remembered how Tom had explained it to her during her recovery. Humans had evolved as persistence predators, developing incredible endurance and healing abilities, while her people had evolved in a protected environment, developing their crystalline forms and advanced minds. Humans had been running down prey and surviving injuries for countless generations. Additional observation: human medical practices often rely on their body's natural healing abilities rather than external technology. This approach, while appearing primitive, is actually a sophisticated adaptation to their species' unique biology. Their ability to function despite significant injury suggests potential military and survival applications that warrant further study. Through her pod's window, Amy noticed one of the new students had indeed fainted during Jack's storytelling. She quickly added, update to previous recommendation. All alien medical observers should be sedated before allowing Ranger Jack to share his medical history. As she prepared to send her report, Amy reflected on how much she had learned in just 2 weeks. She had arrived expecting to teach these primitive humans about advanced medical technology. Instead, she had gained a deep appreciation for their incredible resilience and practical approach to healing. Final note, she typed, her form glowing with warmth. Request permission to extend my stay at the Earth Mountain Clinic for additional research. These humans may lack our technological sophistication, but their natural healing abilities and adaptability offer invaluable insights for the advancement of galactic medicine. Also, I believe I am finally ready to hear the story about the bear, the bicycle, and the spiral fracture. This time, I'll make sure I'm sitting down first. With a soft chime, she sent the report, her form glowing with satisfaction. Outside, she could hear Jack starting another story, followed by the distinct sound of multiple crystalline forms hitting the floor. Amy's glow pulsed with what could only be described as a laugh. Some things, it seemed, would never change.